Everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Mike Weiland, the CEO of Govly, where companies, resellers, and distributors work together to bid on government contracts. Mike, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm really excited to dive into your background, your experience with the wealth of knowledge and building startups and going through the process time and time again. And from what I understand, this is your first software technology startup that I definitely want to get into the nuts and bolts of what you've learned jumping into this realm. But before we kick it off and get started, what were you doing before you started Govly?
First, Julian, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. Before Govly is a company called Blazer, which is a full-fledged government contractor where we resell goods and services to the federal government. They're a prime contractor on a couple contracts.
Yeah. Well, when you say government contract, that sounds very vague. And some of us maybe think of like the movie War Dogs. Is it something similar to that or not as Hollywood as we think?
So definitely not as Hollywood, but actually somewhat similar in the idea that the government publishes a lot of opportunities. And so War Dogs pulled down, I think at that time it was called Fed Biz Ops, BO. And, those guys saw an opportunity to sell, and it was ammunition, right?
Yeah, ammunition, arms.
Yeah. So Blazer and myself, not done munitions or as we call it, things that go boom. We have focused mostly on the IT side, the hardware, software, and related services. And so the vast majority of government opportunities actually comes through not on that FBO. It's now sam.gov. That's kind of the public site. Yeah. What most of the opportunities come through are private contract vehicles. And anybody that has access to those prime contract vehicles is a prime government contractor. Meaning the best way to look at it is they have a hunting license so that, you could have an Army contract that's a hunting license to sell opportunities to the Army. And if you're a prime on it, you have the opportunity to respond to the RFQs that they post on that contract.
And the people who are selling to the government or, I guess closing these contracts, what is the typical background? Are they, focused in a certain sector area? I mean, obviously we talk about things that go boom, but in other things like IT and solutions and technology, are these companies, are these individuals who are connected to companies? Yeah. Help uncover some of the mystery behind that.
Yeah. So the answer is all of the above. The government being, I believe, the largest single customer on the planet, the US government being the largest single customer on the planet is, they need anywhere from, your highest end storage area network that spans the entire VA medical center to toilet paper. They buy it all. And so the contracts or the people responding to them generally are allocated into, they're broken up by NAICS codes or SIC code. And so the contracts that I have focused on over the past 7-8 years has been entirely in the IT space. So we leverage a NAICS code 541519, which is other computer related equipment services.
Yeah.
Basically anything with a microchip or relates to a microchip.
Yeah. And so I guess, I think a simple question to ask is like, why don't they have a purchaser or someone who's allocated to identifying resources versus putting the information out and almost like crowdsourcing what the best option is for them or the best, I don't know if it's a deal. I don't know exactly what they're looking for, but yeah, why is it flipped to where it's a contract and then people can kind of bid for that contract?
Yeah. And so, I mean, this is a very, very long conversation that I'll make short. It's ultimately the government created something called the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulations. And then on top of that, there's the DFAR, which is the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulations that specifically govern items being sold to Department of Defense. But this FAR, I used to have a copy on my desk. It's about, it would make a Bible blush on how thick it was and how thin the pages were. For all the rules and regulations for what you can and can't do with regards to selling to the government. And, following all, 4,000 of those pages create some really interesting issues with selling technology. So, these rules were created over the past, call it 80 years. Okay. And when technology came in, the speed at which things needed to be acquired drastically needed to increase. And the process for doing that was not very efficient. So the government used to publish basically on FBO, say, hey, I need, 1,000 computers. Who can send me 1,000 computers? And well, lots of people can. And so lots of people would send in quotes and send in bids. And what would happen is the ability to protest and to delay a purchase from the government was so easy that you'd have 100 people, going after that one opportunity. And if one of them wanted to protest, they would, hire an attorney and pay a few $100, and they could delay the delivery of those computers. And it just caused massive delays, so that at the end, even if the rightful person had already won, a year and a half later, the government said, okay, yep, you won. Now you can ship your year and a half old computers. And so, yeah, total mess. A bit of hyperbole in there, but in general, that is the case. And so what the government did was created these other avenues, these contract vehicles, which abide by these regulations, but also have a new set of rules, so that, the example or the analogy of a hunting license, if you are granted or gain access to this contract vehicle, this hunting license says you can't protest if you lose unless it's over $10 million. You have to be able to respond within 24 hours. You have to have letters of authorization preloaded. You have to do all of these things that ultimately result in a faster turn for the government with less risk.
Wow.
Yeah, in theory, the government should, when they want to buy 1,000 computers, should pick up the phone and call Dell.
Yeah.
Doesn't quite work that way.
Yeah. Is this the best way to do it?
It's funny, and that's actually relates to the reason why Blazor and Govly exist. Govly is there in an effort to make things more efficient. I had the idea of Govly, we'll call it, 15, 18 years ago.
Yeah.
And what's pretty wild about it, maybe not that long ago, 15 years ago, what's pretty wild about it is I've spent that time trying to figure out a better way to do it. And while it's nowhere near perfect and it's a mess, it is the best way to do it that we know of today. And so Govly is trying to take that and take it to the next step of just making it more efficient.
Yeah. How are you doing that?
So what we're trying to do what we are doing is create a market network where the contract holders that have these hunting license or contract vehicles. And so there's not that many of them. There's thousands of them, but in the grand scheme of companies that sell to the government, there's, tens and hundreds of thousands of them. But the limit is the companies that have access, these prime contractors. And so what we're doing is creating the network for them to join the Govly platform and to share basically the information that they get from the government and make it easy for them to communicate all the way downstream. And so the way we look at it is, there's the government at the top that's creating the opportunities, the prime contractors that communicates with the government. These primes, depending on who they are, and primes could be a large, HPE level company, or it could be a mom and pop shop. And these primes leverage, their access to IT goods and services, but also their massive network or their supply chain. And so for, the average government contractor has access to a prime. So it's government prime. They buy stuff from either a reseller or a distributor. And obviously they're getting it from the OEM. And so what Govly does is kind of sit on the side and facilitate the sharing of this information in a very seamless and efficient manner. Whereas how I used to do it and how most companies do it today is they get an email from the government and they say, oh, I know Jim over at company over there, and I think he can respond to this. I'm going to email this to him. But these opportunities come out in such high quantities, it just doesn't make sense to do it manually.
Yeah.
On the contracts that we have access to, we see anywhere from 300 to 1,500 net new opportunities every day.
Wow. How is integrating all these different stakeholders into one platform? What are the challenges that you're seeing? Because everyone has email, right?
Sure.
But I'm assuming the government and other entities don't all use Slack. Maybe they use Microsoft Teams. But how do you facilitate the communication and this whole process, and also integrate within all these different stakeholders?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The difficulty is really the ingestion of the original information. So a lot of this information is either emailed from the government or it's on a government portal, and it's all very different types of information. Some are, very structured data, and some are literally a government person sending an email to a mail serve of, 70 people saying, I need, 70 Adobe licenses, delivery to this email address, go. And so what we've done is that's why it had to be a platform play. So we've enabled this ingestion engine so that we can ingest from any source, be it email, be it government, a website, be it a site. So Govly actually enables organizations and the government to post inside of Govly, so they can create an opportunity in Govly. So what we're doing is we're taking all that information, putting it in as structured of a form as we possibly can, and now presenting it, seamlessly to all users. And
Yeah.
so, the prime contractor that has access and is granted access to the government opportunities can now say, hey, I'm in alignment, or I have an agreement with these 40 vendors and these, 200 OEMs. I can select them, and now they can share my information. They can see it the moment I see it. And so what it does is it relieves the burden of the prime to
Yeah.
send it out, because ultimately the OEM, Dell's interested in Dell, HP's interested in HP. And if they have access to it, they are only looking for their stuff, versus the prime is trying to sort through that 1,000 opportunities a day, with potentially 300 different types of technologies.
Yeah. How does someone find themselves selling to the government?
Well, you have to be a special person to want to sell to the government to begin with. It is a fruitful process once you were there. Getting there can be very difficult, because the first question you have to answer is, do you want to be a prime, or do you just want to sell to the government? Are you looking to add the government as a customer? And if that's really all you want to do, what I would suggest and what most people do is they align themselves with resellers or prime contractors that already sell to the government, and you're just adding technology to it.
Got it. Got it. What was your experience being involved with you said you're involved in kind of multiple steps of the process, and I'm assuming,
Yeah.
you might have mentioned this, you were a prime at one point.
Yeah. So Blazor is still a prime, and we work with a dozen or so primes today to manage and help them, facilitate the information sharing. Becoming a prime it's a pain in the ass. Like there's no way around it. These contracts, some of these contracts and the contracts that you want to be on, to list a few, are the SOOF and the CIO and the Army chess and the, even GSA. I mean, there's literally dozens or hundreds of these contract vehicles that you can go after. And the process to win them is generally a 6-month to, I'd say, up to 3 years to get a response. There's the Army chess. It's called a ITES 4H contract. The proposal has been out, I think we're over a year now. It's been delayed so many times, the proposal. So nobody's responded yet. The due date's, I think, in a couple of weeks. And it was original due date was last November.
Oh, wow.
And so it got delayed, which the current iteration, so this is ITES 4H, the ITES 3H, there's 18, maybe 12 or 18 contract holders on it today. So their contract keeps getting extended, or will keep getting extended, because the new iteration hasn't been, released yet. So even when the bids are due here in a couple of weeks, the government's going to take, anywhere from, I'd say, 3 to 12 months to issue a response. And that's if there are no protests. Because again, we're back in the public domain where this is the establishment of a contract vehicle. Anybody right now can go to ITES 4H and bid on it. And it's a very large proposal. It'll probably take the average company, anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks, depending on what kind of resources you put in it. And it's a bit of a nightmare. I believe that there's likely going to be protest on this. And so what it's going to do is the government's going to say, hey, these are the winners. And then there's going to be protests. And then depending on what level of the protest and the government they go towards, the government's going to say, all right, those are the winners, but nobody can do anything until we resolve all of these protests. So we're going to, delay the actual awards. So they're going to keep extending the ITES 3H, the previous version.
Wow.
Which you just have to, it is not, getting into the government, becoming a prime is not for the faint of heart. It is worth it in the end, as long as it's in the arena that you want to do. I don't suggest just going out to bid one. It needs to fall into a core competency you're already doing.
Yeah. Well, outside of, the length of time, I can see what you mean by being a special person, because I'm assuming the amount of, top of the funnel opportunities you have to respond to kind of mitigate the time that you spend waiting for that response to actually win these contracts. And obviously the win-loss rate, increases as you increase the amount of opportunities that you have on the table. But outside of the timeline, what's the difference between, if you could tell the audience, selling to the government versus selling to commercial companies?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the best things about selling to the government is they always pay.
Yeah.
So it's a bit funny talking to banks as a government contractor when they're like, oh, well, there's a risk of the government not paying or your customer not paying. And there's like, no, if that's a problem, you have way bigger problems. So that's always a perk. And I do have to caveat the contracts that I was referring to are those hunting license, those vehicles that give you broader access to regularly sell. Anybody can go to the sam.gov and find an opportunity, bid it and become a prime. A prime just means that you have a direct relationship with the government. But those are, far and few in between. It's just you're not going to make a business off of going after sam.gov opportunities.
Yeah.
But as far as the difference between commercial and government, the regulations associated with dealing with the government is the biggest challenge. You have to have a public profile in that sam.gov website. You have to regularly update it every year with, the ownership structure, and you have agreed not to, violate any laws. You can't have any felonies. You can't have all of these things. You can't purchase things from non-friendly nations. So it's a event. Most organizations that have prime contracts have a dedicated person, a program manager, that's charged with entirely just making sure that the access and the requirements to maintain access are kept.
Yeah. It's, outside of Govly, which seems like, a very disruptive technology for this space, where is the level at which the technology that you're dealing with, and like sam.gov and these websites, where are they at? Are they up to date? Are they easy to use, or are they?
It's I don't want to offend any of our government customers. We'll say most of the websites are generally lacking.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to their credit, they are mostly stable just because they've been homegrown built for the longest time. Some of these contracts are very old, and they've just had to iterate on them for the past, 25 years, for example. And because of how much data and how much business goes through some of these, it doesn't make sense to them to, completely revamp, where a commercial company is going to say, oh, we're going to, scrap the old system. And while they probably should, it's not in the cards for them.
Yeah. Yeah. When you say selling to government, and I don't know if, if there's specific customers you can name or anything like that with who you're working with, but who are the types of customers you sell to? Are they certain agencies within the government? Is it certain departments? When we think about selling to the government and who's, setting out these contracts to be filled, who are these individuals, and what's the communication process like?
Yeah. So great question. And it's another difference between government and commercial is that when you sell to the government, it is a normal sales process where you are actually or generally calling on or knocking on the doors of the end users. And so, the contracts that, I've mentioned on the call already are what we call GWACs or IDIQs, which means they're a government-wide acquisition contract or a indefinite deliverable, indefinite quantity. And both of those, all GWACs are IDIQs, not all IDIQs are GWACs. And a GWAC means any federal agency. So literally all of the Department of Defense to all of your civilian agencies, your state departments and such, down to your Bureau of Indian Affairs, large and small, it's any federal agency can buy off of a GWAC. The IDIQ portion of this basically means the government has identified that it needs to buy stuff. It doesn't know what it's going to buy, and it doesn't know how much of it's going to buy, but it's going to buy. And so what that is the Congress and if you guys hear of the budget, the continuing resolution, every agency from top to bottom has a budget.
Yeah.
And what they've done is they've allocated a certain amount of money to go towards these contract vehicles to basically have a pool of money to purchase from.
Got it. Wow. That's so fascinating. And obviously Govly is working on facilitating the communication and acquisition of these contracts and ingesting all this information to expedite the process. But it sounds like that's a portion of the pie. But what else can help? I assume if things are done more quickly and more efficiently and faster, there'd be a lot, better resolution and maybe more up-to-date technology solutions, better toilet paper, what have you, in a lot of these agencies. And what else needs to be done to kind of create a more expedited process? Is it honing in on more premium contractors or people who hold those hunting licenses, as you mentioned, or is it something else? Is it something we haven't thought of yet?
Yeah. So I think that, a combination of many things. And the first thing that's coming to mind is a lot of these contracts have been in government contracting for so long that, they love their stable contract of reselling the same technology basically year over year, just refreshing. The existing structure does not provide an easy access for emerging or new technologies.
Yeah.
And for a lot of agencies, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for, a lot of Department of Defense customers to deploy an untested brand new tech out in the field. That being said, there does need to be an avenue for, the next level entities, the startups that do have technology that are, hey, this is really cool. This is going to kick ass in the next period of time. How can we get some of this into the trial stages or the demo stages with the government? And so these contract vehicles, I do believe, can foster that. And I think Govly can play a role in that, because Govly is making it easier for these smaller entities to gain access to see, hey, there's this opportunity for, pulling something out, hyperconverged deployment, at this location. And these are the specs that it needs to meet. And, there's 3 or 4 really big players in that space that have really good products, but maybe there's, 2 or 3 new incoming that are like, hey, I can do all of those specs and I can do it better, faster, fill in the blank. They need an avenue or an ability to at least submit a bid. And right now they don't. And so that's where Govly can come in and help facilitate access to these opportunities, just to shed some light on, hey, this is the type of stuff the government is requesting on a regular basis. We have an analytics platform that can show you what customers are generally requesting, what type of technology over time. And we can see some trending movements that is all really interesting things to see.
Yeah. What do you enjoy in particular about working with the government?
It's interesting. I think that's probably a little bit on the personal side. Yep. Both my parents were Air Force. My mom worked at the Pentagon. My dad flew C-141s out of Andrews Air Force Base. My grandfather was a colonel in the Marines, and 2 uncles both flew airplanes. And I kind of fell into, I didn't want to go into the government, and I kind of fell into government contracting by randomly getting recruited to a very large defense contractor. And from then it was just, I've thoroughly enjoyed the somewhere between brain damage and very structured mentality of the government.
I love that. What are some of the biggest risks that Govly faces today?
That's interesting. I think the two biggest risks, we're playing in a space that is, dominated by very large entities. And so I think there's always the risk of one of the very large entities going, oh, well, we can do something similar and just dump $30 million into attempting to replicate. I think we've got a very good moat, because it would take a special entity to really do what we've done by creating this actual market network effect where, people are sharing information, and when someone leaving doesn't just affect them, it's affecting anybody upstream and downstream from them. So it does make it very sticky. So I think that moat is pretty good. And then there's also, albeit slight, there's always the possibility the government's, hey, Govly, there's a new rule in that FAR that says, the stuff that you're doing, you can't do. And they could write it into the law, and we'd, get smoked out that way.
Yeah.
I mean, both risks are real, as in they're plausible, but both at this point are unlikely.
Yeah. Yeah. If everything goes well, what's the long-term vision for Govly?
So I want Govly to be the singular point of access for government contracting. And I want it to be this place for, large and small companies to come get structured, intelligent information about what opportunities are available to the government. And to me, in the, that personal endeavor is to make the process easier. By making it easier, you're making it more efficient, which ultimately will save the government money. And, we all pay enough taxes to know that we want to save the government money more regularly anyway. And so I do believe that the government has done a lot of good things in their RFQ process, and by making it so that, fraud and nepotism and, the selling to your brother type of thing is prevented. But I think in the process of all of these extra rules to, create all of these laws to prevent the bad actors, it's caused some slowness, and we need to try to figure out how to bring some of that speed and efficiency back into it.
Yeah. And I alluded to this question earlier in the episode, but I don't think we got to it. What have you learned now that this is obviously it's not your first startup and first company that you've grown and had success with, but what is the difference or what learnings have you gained from working on a primarily software technology company within this space that you think are either exciting, or a tough lesson
Sure.
learned, a curve that you had to surmount? What's been exciting about working with software now?
I think the largest learning lesson that, I suspect to most of your viewers is obvious to them, but was a very steep learning curve for me is my previous experience dealing with government, all the way back to the large defense contractor. The speed at which software moves and the speed at which a SaaS business needs to turn through customers is wild.
Yeah.
It goes from previous companies where landing 1, 2, 3 new customers a month was awesome because these were long relationships that would very high dollar amount. And now in a SaaS entity, it's a total brain shift of we're going to close 10 new customers this month, and the next month we're going to close 14. And so the speed at which things turn has been exciting and terrifying, and the ramp up has been a lot of fun.
Yeah. What kind of strategies do you use to kind of help, I guess, acclimate yourself to this new process or achieve these goals that I'm assuming are stretch goals? If you hit 80% of the goal, you're still happy about it, but obviously hitting 100% of it's tough. But what are some strategies that you have seen that are helpful that could help other founders and deploy it in their organization?
Sure. I think it's a lesson that I've learned over the past few entities. Most telling would be this one is it's especially with a small entity, it's all about the people you have. It's the right people in the right seats on the bus analogy. It's the people that you have when you're at a sub 10 person entity. Every person is very important. And if they're not, pulling their weight or doing what they're supposed to be doing, it's felt way more than, even in a 20 or 40 person company. And so the sales mentality as of late, we've hired some really great people and they've really accelerated our growth. And I can't thank them enough. They've been awesome.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. Well, thank you so much. I know we're at time, but last question before we conclude the episode is something I love for not only selfish research, but for my audience to get gems of information. But what books or people have influenced you the most, either now or throughout your career?
I've had a couple mentors that have been awesome. I'd say they've been the most influential, but for your audience, I've really, really enjoyed and have stuck to Simon Sinek. And I think his book of Start With Why has probably been the most influential. I think it was nice timing in my career a number of years ago, as well as the getting to the root of your customer and understanding your customer best is the best place to start when thinking about launching a company.
I love that. Well, Mike, thank you so much. I enjoyed learning from your experience. Obviously, we haven't had too many GovTech technologies on the show, so incredible to kind of see through the lens of someone who's worked in the sector, but is now building something innovative and disruptive in the sector as well. So kind of marrying the two different distinct parties here, which is super amazing to see. And I hope you enjoyed yourself, but thank you again for being on the show.
Julian, this was amazing. Behind Company Lines has been awesome. And I really appreciate the time.
Awesome. Thanks, man.